I'm 34, and here are the study habits I wish I knew at 24, starting with doing practice tests is the best way to study for exams. Now, the best and fastest way to learn something, like whether it's a skill or remembering information for an exam, is to practice doing it in the same situation where you will actually use it later on. Like, for example, if you want to learn how to play the guitar, the fastest way to learn is to actually pick up a guitar and start playing, and you will learn most of what you need along the way. I mean, sure, you can spend an hour reading about the different parts of a guitar or the proper positioning of your fingers or which type of guitar is best for beginners, but real learning happens when you do the thing in the same context that you'll be using it in. And it's the same thing when studying for a multiple choice exam. Like, the best way to prepare for it is to go straight into doing lots of practice tests, because that closely mimics the real exam that you're eventually gonna take. And that's how you train yourself to recall information under time pressure, or like read question stems faster, and just get better at eliminating wrong options. But the problem is most students don't do this because it's obviously uncomfortable and much harder to do. So instead, they just stick to what feels easier, like reading their notes over and over again, or highlighting a bunch of stuff, or writing down tons of notes, hoping that somehow it'll make them better at remembering the information that they need for the exam. But the truth is, they don't. And you actually don't have to finish reading all of your study materials before you start doing the practice test, which is one of the most common mistakes that students make. Like, you just have to start doing practice tests early on so you can figure out what's important and like what's irrelevant and how all the different pieces fit together once you eventually get to reading your study materials. And if you're preparing for something like an OSCE or a small group discussion, it's the same idea. Like, you need to practice recalling the information, like saying it out loud and doing the whole thing from start to finish. And you can even film yourself while doing it so you can see objectively what you already know and what you still need to work on. Now, number 2 is stop making your own flashcards and stop making your own practice tests. Because the time that you spend making them is time that you're not using in actually studying and remembering the information. I mean, it feels productive, yeah, but it's not. Like, it's just procrastination disguised as productivity. I mean, I know sometimes it feels expensive to buy these pre-made flashcards or practice tests and other resources, but it's really about what your priorities are. Like, you might hesitate to spend money on a set of flashcards at a question bank, but most of the time we wouldn't think twice about spending that same money on clothes or eating at a nice restaurant. And I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy those things, but I'm just saying it's all about prioritization. Like, our most limited resource isn't money, it's time. So if you really want to get better grades and pass your exams and learn anything much faster, you have to spend your time wisely.
Oh yeah, and if you're a postgraduate intern or a PGI, or you're studying for the physician licensure exam or the PLE in the Philippines, and you want to pass the exam so you can become a licensed MD, click the link in the description below right now and sign up for MedQBank, because it will help you remember more information in less time, reduce your test anxiety by becoming familiar with exam questions, and so you can pass the PLE and become a licensed MD in 2026 or whenever you plan to take the exam. And we actually have hundreds of previous subscribers who are now licensed MDs. They tell us that they passed the exam because of MedQBank. So click the link in the description below and invest in your dream of becoming a licensed MD. But if you're not, then hopefully you can still get some value from the rest of the video.
Number 3, only use flashcards during your downtime. Now, I love using flashcards because they're still a form of active recall, but I don't use them all the time. Whenever I'm at my study table, that's not what I'm using, because when I'm studying for a big exam, which is usually a written multiple choice exam, like, doing flashcards is not as good as doing practice tests, because unlike practice tests, flashcards don't train you to think through question stems or get better at eliminating the options, which are the exact skill sets you need to get better at when you're studying for multiple choice exams. So I save flashcards for downtime, like when I'm at the grocery or waiting for my order at a restaurant or sitting on a train. But when I'm in front of my desk, like, I do practice tests because that's what most closely simulates the exam that I'm preparing for. Number 4 is mind maps are a waste of time. Now, this might sound controversial because a lot of education YouTubers, they swear by mind maps. But based on my experience, I think they're a waste of time, especially in medical school, because you can just literally find thousands of mind maps online that are already done for you. And it's also so easy to fall into the trap of spending hours making them look pretty and aesthetic. I mean, sure, that might make studying feel fun for a while, but if your goal is to get a high score and pass your exams, then that's not what's gonna help you get there, right? And in med school, there's just too much to study, like too many books and topics, and I think you're just wasting your time spending hours making something that no one's gonna look at and that you'll probably forget on exam day anyway. And also when you're drawing a mind map with your notes open, you're not really forcing yourself to recall anything, right? Because the moment you forget something, you just look back at your notes. So you're not training your memory to retrieve the information. And that's why when you get to the actual exam, you can't pull that information out of your head because you never practiced doing that skill. The next one is taking notes is a waste of time. Now I know that for most students, taking notes feels like it's the default study technique, but here's the problem. When you take notes, especially during lectures or while reading, you're just copying what you heard or what you read, right? And so the information kind of goes straight from your eyes or your ears to your hand. And so completely bypassing your brain. And so there's no information processing that is happening. I mean, yeah, it feels productive. It feels like you're accomplishing something, but when the exam day comes, you realize that you didn't really remember that much. And when I realized this, I stopped writing everything down. Instead, I just focused on testing myself with practice tests and actively recalling what I've read. Because the goal isn't to have pretty notes, right? The goal is to remember what you learned. Number 6 is sleep to remember. Now, you'd be surprised by how many students say, I studied hard, and I did practice tests, but I still didn't pass the exam. And then when I ask how much sleep they got, they would say like 3 or 4 hours. And so it's no wonder that they didn't pass their exam. Because if you don't get enough sleep, your brain doesn't get to consolidate what you studied that day. And so most of what you learned will just disappear because your brain didn't have the rest it needed to move things from your short-term to your long-term memory. And when I was studying for my exams, I always made sure to sleep at least 7 hours every night, even the night before the exam. And while other students were cramming, I really protected my sleep time. Because it doesn't matter how much material you've covered if your brain is too tired to focus and recall any of it. Number 7 is doing aerobic exercise. Now, another thing that really helped me focus and remember more and just feel better while studying is doing aerobic exercise. Because when you spend all day sitting and reading, your brain starts to feel a bit foggy, so you get distracted easily and it takes forever to get into the rhythm of studying. And so doing aerobic exercise like running or jogging, especially in the morning, it just gets your brain ready and it helps you to really wake up so you can start to become focused right away instead of being sluggish. And it also helps you feel better because you get sunlight and fresh air, and it reminds you that life isn't just about exams. And also aerobic exercise also helps your brain in promoting neurogenesis, meaning you grow new neurons in your hippocampus, which handles the consolidation of your short-term memory to long-term memory. The next one is doing meditation. Now, I used to think meditation was all fluff, that it wasn't real or useful, but that completely changed when I read Hyperfocus by Chris Bailey, and he said that our ability to focus depends on our working memory capacity, and the higher our working memory capacity, the better we can notice when our mind starts to wander and bring it back to what we are doing. And he says in the book that the only thing that increases working memory capacity from the studies and research that he has read is meditation, because that's exactly what meditation is. Like, you sit down with your thoughts, and you notice each distraction and you watch it pass, and like clouds moving across the sky without judging yourself for having them. And every time you bring your attention back to your breath or to the present moment during meditation, that's literally training your brain to focus, because you're teaching it to notice distractions like the same way you would while you're studying, and then you gently bring your attention back to what you're doing. Number 9 is stop doing the Pomodoro. Now, back in college and med school, I always used the Pomodoro technique, the 25 minutes of studying and then 5-minute break. But I noticed that it didn't really help me get into deep focus, because usually right around the 20-minute mark, which is usually when I was finally getting into the zone, and then suddenly the timer would go off. And so I had to stop and take the 5-minute break just as I was building my momentum. And so it would interrupt my flow. But then I came across Andrew Huberman. He's a neuroscientist from Stanford, and he said that most people can focus deeply for around 90 minutes. So I switched to 90-minute focus with 10 to 15-minute breaks in between. And since then, I was able to cover more topics and finish more practice tests, and just overall became more productive. Now, this next one is about time blocking, which basically means deciding ahead of time when and what you're gonna study. For example, 7 a.m. to 12 noon, study, and then 12 to 1, take a lunch break, and then 1 to 5, just continue studying. Because if you don't plan your study schedule ahead, you'll just end up going with the flow, every day, reacting to whatever happens or to whoever asks for your time, and you'll keep telling yourself, oh, I'll study later, but then later never really comes. And so time blocking makes you intentional with your time. Instead of reacting to everyday distractions, is you're following a clear plan and you stop relying on motivation, which comes and goes, and you start relying on the time block that you've set on your calendar. The next one is the 10% principle. Now, this next one I learned from the book Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. So what most people do, and what I used to do before reading the book, is after I wake up, I just go and start studying or work on whatever I feel like doing. But that's how I ended up spending hours on doing low impact activities or studying low yield topics that barely show up in the exam. And so I was like working hard on the wrong things. But the book suggests that we use what's called as a 10% principle, which says the first 10% of time that you spend planning and organizing your work before you begin will save you as much as 90% of the time in getting the job done once you get started. So before you start your day, like take a few minutes to plan on what you're gonna study or work on, and more importantly, why. And that small amount of time will make sure that your effort actually goes toward the right things. And as Stephen Covey once said, if the ladder is not leaning against the right wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place faster. Number 12 is last caffeine intake should be before 2 p.m. Now, when I was in college and med school, I used to drink coffee all day, even at night. And what I didn't realize back then was that caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours. So when I drank coffee at 6 p.m., half of it was still in my system at midnight. And so no wonder that I was not able to sleep properly. So now I stopped drinking coffee after 2 p.m. and that gives my body enough time to break down the caffeine before bedtime at around 9 to 10 p.m. And since then, I've been able to sleep better, like wake up more energized and focus better the next day. Number 13 is don't study with music on. Now this one is also a bit controversial because a lot of people say that they can only study with music. But if you're listening to songs that you know, like especially the ones with lyrics, half of your brain is singing along with the lyrics, while the other half is trying to focus on studying. I mean, it might make studying more enjoyable, but it just really takes your focus and attention on what you're actually trying to do. And that's why I don't study with many music. But if you really want some background sound, just go for like neutral music, like lo-fi playlist or the 40 hertz binaural beats. And actually even classical music can be a bit distracting if you know what that specific classical music is. And so the key is to pick something that doesn't grab your attention so your focus stays on your studying or whatever you're working on. Number 14 is take power naps. Now, taking power naps is one of my favorite study hacks, and I do this all the time when I'm studying for an exam or even when I'm working on a task, especially if I'm sleep deprived from the night before or when I start feeling sleepy in the afternoon after lunchtime. And the key here is to keep it short, because if you nap for too long, you'll enter a deeper stage of sleep, and when you wake up, you'll feel groggy and more tired than before you took a nap, and that's what's known as sleep inertia. And so a proper power nap should only last for like 15 to 20 minutes. And the thing is, even if you don't fall fully asleep, just lying down and resting for that time can recharge your brain and helps you feel alert again and get back to studying or doing the thing that you're working on. Now, this last one is use memory techniques. Now, some people think memory techniques are not important anymore because you can just Google anything, right? And also with AI. But in reality, schools and especially the professions that require a license to practice, they still rely on exams where you need to learn and remember a lot of information, and you can't Google the answers during the exam, right? So if you can't pull that information out of your memory during the exam because you don't know how to memorize stuff, it doesn't really matter how many times you've read it. And actually, learning how to use memory techniques completely changed the way I study. And there's actually this book that I read during my first year in med school. It's called Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer, and it taught me things like the memory palace and the major system for memorizing numbers. And they're the tools used by people who compete in what's known as the memory championships. And actually, you don't have to be born smart to be able to use them, because anyone can literally learn how to use it. And memory techniques, they basically help you remember abstract information by turning it into vivid images that your brain can easily remember. And that's what helped me get good grades in med school and pass all my exams. Not just reading more, but having a system to remember and memorize a ton of information. And now that you know all of the study habits that I wish I knew at 24, the next question is, how do you actually build the study habit to stick and actually help you with your studying? And if you're interested in that, and you might like to check out this video over here, it's about the 5 lessons from the book Atomic Habits that will actually help you pass your exams. Now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in that video. Bye.